What if I told you that NASA has already heard a scream coming from space? It was a freezing dawn in Maryland, in the silent corridors of the Goddard Space Flight Center, when NASA engineers heard something that would forever change the way we imagine the emptiness of space. The clock read 3:42 a.m. The coffee in the mugs was cold, the white glow of the monitors reflected on tired faces, and the control room seemed like just another routine night, monitoring transmissions from the cosmic depths. But that dawn, space spoke, and what they heard sounded like a scream. To understand how we arrived at this moment, we need to go back to the summer of 1977, August, at Cape Canaveral. The heat was suffocating. The air smelled of fuel and burnt metal. Two probes, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, rested on their platforms, awaiting the countdown that would launch them on a journey with no return. The official mission was simple: to explore Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. But there was something more. The Voyagers were like bottles cast into the ocean of the cosmos, carrying not only instruments, but also a message from humanity. The famous golden record, with music, voices, and sounds of Earth. The probes departed, silent against the black backdrop of the sky, and traveled across decades. Each carried a high-gain antenna, capable of sending to Earth signals weaker than the flicker of a light bulb in an entire illuminated city. And yet, those signals traveled billions of kilometers, captured by gigantic radio antennas spread across the world as part of the network known as the Deep Space Network. What no one expected was that, in the middle of measurements of magnetic fields and solar particles, came sounds that should not exist. Because in space, in theory, there is no sound. The vacuum does not carry vibrations the same way air does. Silence should be absolute. But the probes were not capturing ordinary sound waves. They were detecting something different: plasma waves, electromagnetic fluctuations, invisible variations converted into audible frequencies. And it was in that process of conversion that the most disturbing noises ever heard in a NASA laboratory were born. The first strange record came when Voyager 1 flew past Jupiter in March of 1979. During the crossing of its magnetosphere, the instruments exploded with unusual data. The technicians processed the readings, transforming numbers into frequencies. What emerged was impossible to mistake: a sharp, distorted sound that resembled human voices screaming in unison. It was not just white noise, it was rhythmic, like a chorus of laments echoing from within the gas giant. In the control room, the first to hear it was an engineer named Donald Gurnett, a specialist in plasma waves. He was alone, headphones on, adjusting the spectrogram. At first, it sounded like a distant whistle, like wind rushing through a cavern. But suddenly, the audio erupted into high, modulated frequencies, something that made the skin crawl. He tore off the headphones with a jolt, staring at his colleagues who watched in confusion. "You need to hear this," he murmured, almost unable to believe what he was saying. Over the following years, more recordings began to pile up. When Voyager flew past Saturn in 1980, the audios were even more disturbing, a hiss that morphed into metallic moans, as if something were trying to communicate through the noise. In 1986, near Uranus, the sounds resembled muffled wails, distant voices in a submerged tunnel. And in 1989, as it passed Neptune, the audio sounded like prolonged whistles that unfolded into broken screams. Officially, the explanation was clear: plasma interacting with planetary magnetic fields, waves translated into sound, pure science. But those who listened, they knew. They knew there was something beyond mathematics, because emotion cannot be explained in graphs. And for those in that room, it felt as if the universe itself had a throat, lungs, and pain. Copies of the tapes began to circulate discreetly inside NASA. Engineers passed cassette recordings to one another, hidden in folders, as if they were forbidden secrets. Many laughed, calling them horror soundtracks. Others, in silence, just shook their heads, with the strange feeling that they had heard something they were never meant to. Some of those audios leaked to the public in the 1990s. In 1992, newspapers and TV shows briefly mentioned the sounds of space, but nothing prepared those who actually listened. People reported instant chills. Others claimed they dreamed of endless corridors and echoing voices, as if the universe itself were calling. Some described a sensation of presence, of something there, alive, hidden in the darkness. The detail is that these sounds are not static. They change over time, as if telling their own story. In the case of Ganymede, Jupiter's moon, the audio began softly, a steady whistle, and suddenly transformed into a prolonged metallic scream, as if coming from frozen caverns. In another recording near Saturn, it sounded like a choir in mourning, overlapping voices like an invisible crowd imprisoned somewhere. And then in August 2012 came the most unsettling moment of all. Voyager 1 crossed the heliopause, the boundary between the space dominated by the Sun and interstellar space. It was the first time a human object officially entered interstellar space. When the data arrived, almost 17 hours after transmission, the scientists heard something new. It wasn't a chorus nor bursts. It was a continuous, high-pitched, sustained sound, almost like an eternal whistle. At times, the intensity varied, creating the illusion of a voice approaching and retreating. Engineers joked that it was the sound of space whistling at us, but behind the scenes, many admitted their unease, because it didn't feel purely physical. It felt like a call. Today, anyone can access those files on NASA's official website. You can download the audios and listen on your phone, your computer, in your bedroom. But the impact will never be the same, because listening at home is one thing. Being in a dark lab, surrounded by machines, knowing those sounds traveled billions of kilometers from places no human has ever set foot, is something else entirely. Imagine the scene. You are alone, headphones on, listening to a signal from 20 billion kilometers away, a signal sent from a tiny machine lost in the darkness more than 40 years ago. And suddenly, what you hear sounds like a scream, a lament, an echo. You know the explanation lies in physics, but deep down, something else speaks to you. Something not science, but instinct. There are no screams in space, but when we translate the silence of the universe, what we hear sounds very much like that. And maybe it's only because the human brain refuses to accept the void. It fills the silence with what it fears the most: screams, voices, presence. Maybe the sounds of space are not the universe communicating with us, but our own reflection, returned as an echo from an endless abyss. And still, the question remains, why do they sound so human? Why in the middle of magnetic chaos and solar particles do we hear something that resembles pain, fear, loneliness? The answer, perhaps, is not in the stars, but in ourselves. Because when we listen to the void, what we hear, deep down, is the echo of our own solitude, reflected back from the infinite. The Voyagers continue traveling, silent, sending weaker and weaker signals. One day, the batteries will die, and the transmitters will go dark. and then space will reclaim its absolute silence. Until then, the tapes remain, reminding us of a moment when the void seemed to speak. And when we listen to those recordings, we cannot escape the feeling that somehow, in that deep silence, there is something or someone listening back.